All right, today we are diving into a really fascinating and honestly pretty challenging idea: the lost cosmology of the Bible, from the historical series The Wars of Light and Darkness. So let's just jump right in with a pretty provocative question. What if the Bible, as we know it, one of the most studied books in all of history, is missing entire chapters? And I'm not talking about a few verses here and there. I'm talking about foundational concepts that were maybe deliberately taken out. The source material we're looking at today puts it in a really stark way. It talks about these censored black holes in the Bible story, gaps that are supposedly so perceptible, so obvious, that they're like the big empty spaces you see in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It really makes you wonder, right? What was originally in those holes? Okay, so where do we even begin to look for these so-called missing pages? Well, for a long time, scholars have been scratching their heads over something kind of weird about the Old Testament. It doesn't really present a single, neat, tidy theology. A lot of the time, it just feels fragmented. You've got key ideas kind of scattered all over the place. Now, according to the theory we're exploring, this wasn't some historical accident. It was a deliberate process. A purge, really. The idea is that a group of later editors, who scholars called the Deuteronomists, went through and systematically removed, or at least seriously downplayed, a very specific kind of material that they just didn't like. A worldview that our source calls cosmotheistic. And this is where things get really interesting, because you've got two major schools of thought on how to tackle this. On one side, you have the Old Testament theology school. They stick only to the Bible as we have it today, the final canonical version. But then you have the history of religion school, and this is where our source material lives. These folks pull in everything: extra biblical texts, archaeology, stuff from neighboring cultures like the Ugaritic epics, to try and piece together what the religion actually looked like before all those final edits were made. All right, so if we're going to go down that second path, that history of religion path, where are the clues? Where's the evidence of this stuff that was supposedly cut out? Well, that brings us to our first big clue: the role of the Davidic king, which, as you'll see, seems to have been seriously downplayed. The central idea here is something called sacral kingship. And you gotta understand, this was a super common idea all over the ancient Near East. The king wasn't just some political leader, the guy in charge. He was seen as a literal living connection, a bridge between the heavenly realm and our earthly one. He was the pivot point for the entire cosmos. And here's the thing. Traces of this belief are still in the Bible, but they're kind of quiet, muted. Our source argues the Davidic king's job was way bigger than just ruling. He wasn't just like a son of God. At his coronation, he was considered the divine son of God. He didn't just have wisdom, he was a direct mouthpiece for the deity, possessed the very spirit of God. He was, in essence, the earthly counterpart to the heavenly king. I mean, that's a much more cosmic role than most of us are used to thinking about. Okay, so the king was one part of that cosmic connection. He was the human link. Now let's look at clue number 2, the physical place where that connection happened. We're talking about the temple and what it really meant. I mean, if you've ever tried to read through parts of Exodus or First Kings, you know what I'm talking about. The Bible spends so much time on the construction of the temple. It gives you these super meticulous, almost obsessive details, the exact materials, the dimensions, where every single piece of furniture goes. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why all this detail? Why did it matter so much that a pillar was exactly this high or that a wall was made of a certain kind of wood? The Bible is great at giving us the what, but it's pretty quiet on the why. Well, we get a huge clue from the ancient historian Josephus. He flat out says that the temple and all the stuff in it, it wasn't just about being a functional building. It was all symbolic. He says, and I quote, "It was made in a way of imitation and representation of the universe." Wow. Okay, so once you have that piece of the puzzle, everything starts to click. The temple wasn't just a building, it was a microcosm. It was a map of the entire cosmos built right here on Earth. That 4-square design, that's the 4 quarters of heaven. The cherubim and palm trees all over the walls, that's the heavenly Garden of Eden. And that central altar, that was the cosmic mountain, the literal access point connecting Earth to heaven. It all starts to make sense. So let's recap. We've got our 2 huge clues. Clue number 1, a sacral king who acts as a human link to the heavens. And clue number 2, a cosmic temple that's basically a physical model of the universe. So now, let's put these pieces together and see if we can reconstruct this supposedly lost faith. The big idea that ties all this together is what our source calls cosmotheism, and it's actually a pretty straightforward concept. It's the worldview that heaven and earth aren't two separate places. Instead, they're in this constant dynamic relationship. What happens up there, these dramas among celestial beings, is directly mirrored down here on earth, and what we do down here can affect what happens up there.
And this right here, this is the central argument. This is the proposed solution to those black holes we started with. The thesis is that the original Israelite religion, before all the edits, was fundamentally cosmotheistic. This was its operating system, and this is the worldview that was supposedly purged from the text. So how did this all work? Think of it like a complete system, an Earth-heaven interface. It starts in the heavens, where you have these celestial events happening. Then, the sacral king. He's like the living antenna, the human channel, tuning into what's going on. The cosmic temple is the physical location, the point of contact where the signal comes through. And finally, the rituals performed on Earth. They weren't just about worshiping some far-off god. They were about actively taking part in what was happening in the cosmos to keep everything in alignment. And this is a really important shift in perspective. According to this view, the original religion wasn't really about abstract theology or what we might call faith. It was an incredibly practical system. The whole point was to do the right rituals with the right person in the right place, all to maintain cosmic balance. It was about keeping the entire universe running smoothly. So, that leaves us with one heck of a final question to chew on. If this entire way of seeing the world, this cosmotheistic, participatory worldview, was systematically and deliberately erased from some of the most foundational texts in history, well, what does that mean? How does it change how you read, not just the Bible, but the ancient history that it shaped? Please like and subscribe for more videos like this. For more information or to purchase this full volume, please press on the link in the description.